sometimes I even joke with my clients and say to them, I
Peace,
should love
peace.
you. Just seeing your journey, just
Is
seeing
that you, Frank?
that's really what gets me
Yeah,
going
I'm
in
trying
the morning.
to. I don't know, my computer is giving me a problem.
Peace and blessings, though, to everyone tuning in to another episode of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. And I appreciate you all who continue to join us every week. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to our podcast and book club. I am Ikemba Ajore, head writer, researcher of We Charge Colonialism.
Good morning, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series every Friday.
All right, and we're going to be holding it down for you today. And as usual, we always start the first half of our podcast talking about current events, things that are pertaining to the African experience around the world, on the continent and the diaspora, as we address colonial conditions. We Charge Colonialism, a grassroots think tank, and part of our mission is to address the colonial conditions and also to get African people as well as the international community to recognize African people as a colonized people under the boot of European colonialism, European imperialism. We have to address that. We have to address this reality in order for us to change our political and economic conditions. So with that being said, the first half, we talk about current events. And then in the second half, we go into our book reading. For the last week, we just started on Pan-Africanism, a history. And we're going to continue to read from that book today, starting from chapter 1. There should be a link. Actually, that's another thing. We got to put a link in the chat. I'll put the link in the chat for that particular book in a second so that you can follow along with us. So look out for that link in a minute. But again, we're reading from a Pan-Africanism, a history by Hakeem Adi. And this is going into the establishment or the foundation of the concept and idea and movement of Pan-Africanism. So it's a good read. And I'm looking forward to getting into that in the second half of our podcast and book club. So we're going to start off with what's been going on around the world, particularly in Burkina Faso. So Frank, as you get into that, I'm going to make sure our folks get the link to the reading.
Oh, sorry. While you're doing that, let me pull out the article or the story that I want to talk about Burkina Faso. And then 1 minute, folks. Let me pull. Let me see here. Why didn't it come out? I didn't show out, but anyway, let me do it from here. Let me see here. All right, so this is a story about Burkina Faso as it relates to gestatory activities on the African continent. And so as we speak right now, Burkina Faso, Niger, they are all being on attack. And as we've been following the story of Mali, where the French military was taken out of Mali, and the Niger authority invited the French army, and now they have a base there. But despite having a French army in Niger or base in Niger, that is not even solving or helping the army or the government in our region to fight the jihadi or the terrorists. So the reason why I brought this is not because actually I want to talk about the terrorist activities and stuff, but we keep telling African leaders the solution to the terrorist activities on the African continent. For one fact, and which is truth, when there was no foreign military on the African continent, there was no such activities, proliferating on the African continent. But the moment we started having or bringing in foreign military to have foreign bases on the African continent, proliferating on the African continent, we start experiencing heavy terrorist attack on the African continent and so forth. So I'm bringing this to the African nations or the African continent or the African leaders as a solution. And we hope one day they come across our videos and what we are talking about and solution we bring to the table. So I'm just going to read and then say what I want to say. So it said, Burkina Faso, jihadi raid death toll rises to 86, and it's going to rise more than this if the African leaders do not listen to us, and if they don't pay attention to us, it's going to get more than this, and it's going to get more chaotic than this, and the African continent going to be a war zone even more than the Middle East if they don't listen to us. Now it says the death toll from a weekend jihadist attack in northern Burkina Faso has risen to 86, authorities have said. The previous toll in the attack in Senhitinga village stood at 79. The country military leader, Paul Heron, the member, on Wednesday promised action against the attacker when he visited the scene of the tragedy. Burkina Faso has been grappling with a jihadist insurgency since 2015. Again, like we said, the moment they started going African, foreign military start going on the African continent, we start heavily experiencing these type of attacks on the African people since they started going there, since foreign military or African. Now, since 2015, which has claimed thousands of lives and displaced nearly 2 million people. All right. The latest raid is a major setback for the military government. The conflict, which also affects stewards of Mali and Niger, is displacing rural communities and contributing to a serious shortage of food. But this is where I want to pay attention to. Burkina Faso has been grappling with a jihadi insurgency since 2015, which has claimed thousands of lives and displaced nearly 2 million people. Now, let me go back here. That's the area I want to focus. So, this is what's happening on the African continent, right? And we keep telling the African leaders, one nation cannot fight these terrorist activities on the African continent, because as you are fighting the terrorists in Burkina Faso, Niger is fighting the terrorists, Mali is fighting the terrorists, Sudan is fighting the terrorists, Mali is fighting the terrorists, Togo is fighting the terrorists. Okay, and very soon it's going to start coming to Ghana. It's going to start coming to Africa, to Liberia, to Guinea. In fact, Guinea is already open, and Sierra Leone, all of those things. And we keep telling African leaders that one nation cannot fight the terror. And the solution to fighting terrorism on the African continent, number one, the first thing here is to get out these foreign military proliferating on the African continent. They are the ones supporting these jihadis. And it was once reported in Nigeria by the Nigerian army that foreign entity, foreign organization, NGO, I just forgetting them, but from the Médecins Sans Frontières, they were the ones supporting medical supply to the Boko Haram in Nigeria. That was reported by the Nigerian military army. If they can do that, if NGO can do that, Médecins Sans Frontières giving a medical supply to Boko Haram, a terrorist group, then what much more that is going on behind the scene? If they can do it, these foreign military on the African continent are the ones supplying those ammunition and weapons and machinery to the jihadi. They are the ones supplying these people. So we can only fight these people. Let's go back to history. When they were not on the African continent, the African continent was much safer. We wasn't experiencing anything of such. But the moment they started going there, getting bases and things, we start experiencing heavy jihadi or terrorist activity just like the Middle East. The African leaders should get together and draft all these foreign military on the African continent. They are the ones causing the problem. Number two, once they do that, they should form a correlation of African military. It is time that we have one united army of Africa. This is the time. It is time for them to have a correlation of one united military of Africa to fight jihadi. That's the only solution. Get these foreign military out of the African continent and form one correlation of African military. That's it.
So you mean something like the Europeans do with NATO when they want to deal with, an enemy to their interests, or to their security? They set up the this defensive military unit, such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So yeah, I agree with you. I unite that Africa definitely needs to develop something like that, and for the internal threats, but also the external threats. And when we talk about the terrorists, the biggest terrorists on the planet are those states that came into Africa and began to enslave and take Africans into what we call the diaspora now. That's what created the diaspora. Is when they took those Africans to the Americas and to other parts of the world in the form of slavery, and also the colonization that took place on the continent. All of that was a form of terrorism, and it's a form of terrorism that we're still fighting today. So I think we do need that to defend ourselves from all types and acts of terrorism. But also, it has me thinking, and you kind of highlighted it, is like the Europeans aren't there and the Americans aren't there to protect the interests of the Africans, right? They're there for their own interests. And it's kind of, they're not there to solve any problems, whether, military, political, economic, or otherwise. And it makes me think about even within the Black communities here in America, if you look at some of the urban cities, they put in more police. They even have FBI involvement. You have FBI in these communities. So you have the FBI, you have the police, the arm of the state that's in these urban areas, in these Black communities, supposed to be protecting and serving. But it's doing nothing to really curb the crime, to really solve the problems of African people. That's because it's not really in their best interests. If we had control, if we were defending our own communities, we would know exactly what to do, and the crime would decrease at a dramatic, rate. And it's the same thing on the continent. No matter how much military force they put on the continent, it's never going to solve the problems. It's never going to solve the crisis that's taking place on the continent, because they're the source of the problem. Like, they're the creators of the problem. So why would they want to solve the problem? They're able to, as long as there's chaos on the continent, they're able to benefit economically. They're able to pit one group against another group. And as long as we're fighting, they're on the land and they're extracting the resources. So while we're distracted fighting each other or aligning ourselves, some of us aligning ourselves with the colonizers to help extract those resources, the masses of African people remain poor. The African working class remains exploited, because we can't come to grips, or we can't, stop for a moment and think about, if we come together and unite, how we can solve every single problem that we have on the continent tonight. And that's why Pan-Africanism, this book that we're going into, talking about Pan-Africanism, is so important. Getting people to understand the concept of Pan-Africanism, because even today, I see so much confusion. So many people have went away from the idea of Pan-Africanism, and there's a lot of confusion being sown about the concept of Pan-Africanism. So, any attack on the idea of people uniting and working together to solve a problem, if people begin to attack that, you have to question them. You have to question their motivations. And a lot of these people who come up with some sort of excuses of why we shouldn't adopt Pan-Africanism, or come up with some sort of these criticisms, is usually based on an idea about Pan-Africanism that's false. That's not even true. And you can tell that they haven't done any studying or have any understanding of what Pan-Africanism is. And so, that's why I appreciate the work that even We Charge Colonialism does, is because, we are out here combating all of the misinformation that's being put out, not just by the colonial media, but even by by African people who align themselves with the colonizers. And that's the issue of neo-colonialism, is that we have too many Africans on the continent and the diaspora who are working against the interests of the African working class, and so we have to call them out as well. But yeah, I hope I didn't digress too much from the story. I appreciate you bringing this up. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, you touch on the story, and especially again, all of this lead to Pan-Africanism. All of this lead to Pan-Africanism. Number one, Pan-Africanism, is a notion of getting away with these colonial, friendship. And basically, what you just said, that's it. African, uniting, African worldwide uniting and finding and one unified body is Pan-Africanism. And that is why exactly we are saying here that it is time that we have a one unified African army. That's the battle line about it. Because if DRC is not free today, that means no foreign military will fight for Africa, will free Africa, will die for Africa. They have never died for anybody in DRC Congo since United Nations have been there. And in fact, one United Nations, I don't know if it's a peacekeeping or workers, that's a worker. That's not even peacekeeping, because that is not peace. One United Nations worker died, and the United Nations took that very seriously and said it is against humanity. It is a crime. But millions of Congolese have died, and the United Nations have not made any such statement. But one UN worker in DRC Congo exploiting the people and their resources, one of them died, and they took that serious. It's on a battlefield. If you go on a battlefield, you will die. So the Congolese that are dying on a battlefield, that the innocent Congolese that are dying, what much more about one or two United Nations workers that die? We don't care. We don't care. We don't care. And that's the bottom line about it. If they cannot free DRC Congo, that alone shows to us that they cannot do anything on the African continent to die for African people. They never die for African people. They will never die for African people.
Indeed, indeed. And so we're going to transition though to the next story, one that caught my attention. There was a summit that just took place. I wish I could have been on the continent to participate in this summit around reparations. I'm going to share my screen. It's a short article. I think I'm going to read it because it's so short, and I want to touch on everything that's in here. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So time for Africa to get reparations, says Ghana's president. So there was a summit that just took place on August the 1st. I think it was over a 3-day span. And so Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, has called for slavery reparations to Africa and the African diaspora. And this is a long overdue call. So speaking at the Reparations and Racial Healing Summit on Monday, August 1st, President Akufo-Addo said these reparations were long overdue and needed to be intensified. He questioned double standards in the debate when it came to other races and ethnic groups that were wrong historically. Native Americans have received and continue to receive reparations. Japanese American families who were incarcerated in intern camps in America during World War II received reparations. Jewish people, 6 million of whom perished in the concentration camps of Hitlerite Germany, received reparations, including homeland grants and support. He also complained that all the owners of enslaved Africans received reparations to the tune of 20 million pounds sterling, but enslaved Africans themselves did not receive a penny. Haiti also had to pay reparations amounting to $21 billion to French slaveholders in 1825 following the Haitian Revolution. Wiltz reiterating that no amount of money can restore the damage caused by the transatlantic slave trade and its consequences, which have spanned many centuries. The president stated that nevertheless, it is now time to revive and intensify the discussion about reparations for Africa. Indeed, the time is long overdue. He thus asked participants at the summit not to overly concern themselves with modalities for the payment of reparations, but rather work to establish unequivocally first the justice and the call for reparations. And even before these discussions on reparations conclude, the entire continent of Africa deserves a formal apology from the European nation involved in the slave trade for the crimes and damage it has caused to the population, psyche, image, and character of the African world over, the president added. All right, so we'll stop there. Again, this caught my attention because I think the call for reparations is an important one. But I think like the call for reparations, in my opinion, is part of an overall strategy to overturn our relationship with the colonizer. Because at the end of the day, I don't see reparations without like a real distribution of wealth and the overturning of colonial capitalism is not going to mean much. I mean, is it going to improve the lot of some Africans at home and in the diaspora? Like, of course. And that's the problem with capitalism, because some people think that they achieve some success in this system, that, this system works. It's a great system. But no, this system, it does not work for the masses of African people. And reparations itself is going to really empower the white power structure at the end of the day if there's no redistribution of, I'm talking about land, right? I'm talking about land redistribution, wealth distribution. There has to be like no compromise in that. But if we're talking about just, programs and, and checks, like, come on, who's printing the money at the end of the day? So, this it's not going to tilt the balance of power. And so we should be concerned about power, self-determination, having control over our land and having control over our resources. And so, and that's a reparations call that the European does not want to hear. So if anything, like whatever, I think the reparations call is an important one. But us, pan-Africanist revolutionaries understand that political education is going to be needed for a lot of our folks who are fighting for reparations. They're going to need PE. They're going to need to understand the importance of a total transformation of the system and our relationship with the colonizer if we ever going to be a liberated and free people. But Frank, did you have any thoughts on this summit or call for reparations?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, for him, as a leader, we know Nana Akufo-Addo, he talks sometimes, he talks sometimes very brilliantly, and you think, and you think he's going to, work on it, you think he's going to enforce it, and you think he's going to mobilize African leaders, just like Gaddafi was really into it and putting people together. You would think Nana Akufo-Addo would do that the way sometimes he gave his speech and the way sometimes he really say it, like, he said it to the extent that you sit there and wonder, like, yeah, I think we got somebody, we got somebody in power. But, you can't really trust him that he's going to push it. He's going to force it, right, to work on it. But the fact that, he spoke about it, I think we also need to remind him that, Mr. Man, you said this, and we want you to live by it, and we want you to mobilize African, leaders and things, because again, he can't do it by himself. It have to be all of Africa, all of African leaders, all of Africa in the diaspora working together, putting force on these people. I mean, if anybody's supposed to receive reparation, it should be African, and it shouldn't even take that long, because the Chinese had nothing to give to the colonizer. But they are not the Chinese, but the Japanese. They had nothing to give to the colonizer, but they were able to receive reparation, right? They don't have any kind of resources to give to the colonizer that the colonizer want. But we got everything that they need. But we can also put force on the colonizer and they will give a reparation. And one of the area, as you are talking, is for African leaders to mobilize themselves and form an organization with other non-political entities who are also advocating for reparation and working together. Now, that can also be because you can't be fighting for reparation against a colonizer and then at the same time making deal with the colonizer to get your resources. Because the point here is, as long the colonizer have it easy in getting your resources, there will be no way they speak about reparation. You have to bring them to a point where they will be badly in need, and you will see them discussing this. You can't be fighting for reparation at the same time making deal with them in getting your resources for little or nothing, and then give you pocket change or crumbs, and you give your resources to them, and then in turn go back and tell them you fighting for reparation. First of all, the reason why you're fighting for reparation is because they were able to colonize you and exploit your resources from you and ill-treated you, and that's why you're asking for reparation. And at the same time, you're still making it accessible to them. Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense. Now, you can't be asking for reparation, and at the same time, they are the same people that control your land, control your mining industry, control your sector, and you're asking them for reparation. And you have no control over your land. You can't be asking for reparation, and at the same time, you do not have stable government on the African continent. There is no stable government on the African continent as long the governmental system on the African continent are being perpetuated or controlled or undermined by these colonizers. You can't be asking for reparation because they are the ones that still control the African continent. They are the one, in most instances, that still decide who should be leader on the African continent. They are the one that still decide, in most instances, who should be the appointees for a specific nation. They are the one who still decide how sanction should be put on certain nations in Africa who want to be different from the rest or who do not agree with the ideology of the West. You can't be in a situation and then asking for reparation from these people. It can't work. Okay? Freedom does not come easy. You can't get freedom by morality and so forth. Like I saw the post yesterday. Somebody posted it. They said, even though how they call it, the guy that stoned Goliath or something, I don't know what his name, but they said even though he pray, but there's the story in the Bible about Goliath and one other person. He prayed, but at the end of the day, he ended up taking stone to stone Goliath to win the battle. So that means, freedom does not come by morality. Justice does not come by morality or being peaceful. Okay? In this case of the African context, in working or in gaining freedom with the colonizer, it do not come by prayer, by being prayerful, by praying to them, or by praying for them, or by fasting for them to listen. It don't come that way. That is just to say again, bravo, he brought the idea up, but it is unto him now to rally out against African leaders to do some of these things.
Shay, yeah, most definitely appreciate that analysis. And so what we're going to do, this is the second half. We're going to go into our book reading. I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in too, but make sure you like and share as well. Never forget that, like and share so we can spread the wealth. All right. And we're going to go into, I had put a link to the reading in the chat. Let me see. Do I need to repost that? There should be a link to the reading in the chat. We're reading from Pan-Africanism, A History by Hakeem Adi. And we're going to be reading from page page 7. So chapter 1, page 7, for all those people who want to follow along. And we're going to get into this history of Pan-Africanism. Again, appreciate everybody for tuning in, everybody for being engaged in the chat, staying on point. So chapter 1, the forerunners. Before the concepts of Pan-African and Pan-Africanism fully emerged at the end of the 19th century, there were various organized efforts by Africans in the diaspora during the 18th century to unite to combat racism, to campaign for an end to the kidnapping and trafficking of Africans, or to organize to repatriate to the African continent. In Britain, for example, there appeared to have been several informal efforts before African abolitionists, led by Olado Equiano and Oduba Kugoano, formed the Sons of Africa organization in the 1780s to campaign for an end to Britain's participation in the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. The Sons of Africa appears to have been one of the first Pan-African organizations. Its members came from different parts of West Africa, but as a consequence of enslavement and forced migration, found themselves in England, where they organized collectively to find solutions to the common problems they faced. The Sons of Africa wrote letters to the press, lobbied Parliament, jointly addressed the Quakers, and cooperated with other abolitionists and radicals as part of the wider campaign against the trafficking of Africans and for the rights of all. Across the Atlantic, in Boston in 1784, the abolitionists, Prince Hall, and others organized the first Masonic Lodge in North America as a means of combating racism and for mutual support and with a clear orientation towards Africa. Hall subsequently organized lodges in Philadelphia and Rhode Island and identified himself with efforts being made by some African Americans to return to Africa, while other Africans in Rhode Island also organized various types of fraternal organizations. 3 years later, an African church movement developed in Philadelphia and Baltimore out of the Free Africa Society founded in Philadelphia by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, which itself emerged from opposition to racism within the Methodist Church. The African Methodist Episcopal AUMD Church became the most notable outcome of this movement, which also emerged in other North American cities, and through the activities of Daniel Coker and others, soon also extended to Sierra Leone and West Africa. An earlier African Baptist movement had begun in Savannah in the 1770s, and some of its disciples had subsequently founded similar churches in Canada and the Caribbean colonies. A notable example was George Liel, sometimes known as the first Baptist missionary, who established the Ethiopian Baptist Church in Jamaica in 1793. What is noticeable about such early initiatives is that they identified positively with Africa and were often accompanied by efforts to refute the dominant racist ideology of the day, which argued that Africans were inferior to Europeans or even subhuman and only fit for the enslavement. Absalom Jones specifically referred to the links between those in Africa and the diaspora in one of his most famous sermons, in which he not only refers to our brethren in Africa, but also to all Africans' shared history. The African-American activist and missionary Daniel Coker wrote his own refutation of pro-slavery arguments in a dialogue between a Virginia and an African minister published in 1810. David Margaret, another African missionary preacher, preached a message of revolutionary African liberation on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1770s, in London, as well as in South Carolina and Georgia. It was said of him that he can't bear to think of any of his own colors being slaves, and he said of himself that he had been called to deliver his people from slavery. I mean, I could stop there for a second before we carry on and just talk about, how these early on, how these Africans who were in the diaspora were working to develop institutions to serve a common interest that they all had, which was to end slavery, right? Which was to end the trafficking of Africans. But it was to solve an overall African problem, right? It wasn't an individual problem, because it wasn't individuals that was put, or can I say, like, when they brought Africans over to the Americas, they weren't bringing just one and two, right? They were bringing groups, they were bringing nations of African people over to the Americas. And so that's something that we have to realize. So any problem that we have to solve as African people have to be thought of in those terms, as a group, as a nation. And I think, like, many of these Africans were beginning to understand what needed to be done to solve their problems. And so they started to develop institutions around the concept of not just being an Igbo and not just being the Yoruba, not just being Mende or Timini. It was around the concept of them being African people, because they understood that the problems that they were in was because that another group of people saw them all as one people, as African people. And so it became a national problem, or not in terms, I'm gonna just say it became a group problem at this particular time. So appreciate, like, how we go back to the 18th century and see, even before the term pan-Africanism came about, that there was these institutions that could be categorized or labeled as pan-African, because you had people who were coming from different parts of the continent working together to solve common interests. Did you want to add something, Frank? Trying to get this together.
Yeah, before I can add, let me respond to Nkrumah. He said, Frank, have you read the handbook yet? I don't know which handbook he's talking about. Or Nkrumah, are you talking about this? If you're talking about this, yes, I have read it. Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but
that's how we do. You ask us,
yeah.
We read. We're gonna pull the book up for you. We got it right here.
Yeah. So, but just in response to what you were saying, it is a truth. African, we have been put in such a position all around the world that we have to figure out, what to do to get back to that point that we were once at in terms of history and of our existence and so forth and things. Now, like you are saying, let me just add to what you are saying about African coming together in the diaspora and not thinking about Yoruba or Kisi or Mendi or Kran or Gio and so forth and things. Let's also realize that when we came out here, we had, we were speaking our languages, and we were speaking in our various tongues. But that alone could still unify us, because if people who speak Mende were in the same group, it was going to change their mind. And because there is power in language, and that is what we need to realize when we speaking these European languages. It makes us less powerful, but there is power in culture, there is power in languages and so forth. So when we came out here, the colonizer noticed it, or the enslaver noticed it, that there is power in culture, there is power in identity, there is power in language. So if we keep these people together, they are going to be more powerful. So what they did was they started to displace out. So if you spoke Kisi, they took you to put you with Mende or Yoruba or Fanti. So they just displaced us in those forms that we could not communicate, and that alone as well too is part of where hatred came in between Black people in this country, because of those kind of arrangement they did to us, because we could no longer communicate, we could no longer form a correlation. So in order to bring that back to existence, it was like, okay, now we have lost our identity, we have lost our tribes, our tongues, our mother tongues, we have lost it. So all we need to do again to regroup ourselves is to look at ourselves as African. Okay, so at that time, there was no Yoruba. In fact, they were out of the system. No Fanti, no Kisi, no Ewe, and so forth and things, because they could no longer speak. And they could no longer speak it. So, in order to come by, okay, we have to just look at one another as African. So whether you spoke Yoruba before, as long as you can speak it, whether you spoke Fanti, as long as you can speak it, you are still African. I'm African. You are African. We are African. So that was one step they did, and that's what the book is describing. And I think that's what we should look at, even those that still speak the Yoruba on the African continent or the Kisi or whatsoever. At the end of the day, in order to get to where we want to get, we have to be African, despite, the colonial identity of Liberian or Ghanaian or Malian. And, we have to instead go back to history and look at the African map where there was no bolos, and still think, how did we live during this time period, and try to go back to that time period.
Yeah, and when you think of Africa, Africa is a collective. When you think of African people represent a collective of groups that come together and that are working together, that have a variety of cultures that we are able to share with each other, as we continue to work, political and develop political and economic institutions to benefit us all. I mean, like how many Africans speak, multiple languages? I meet some Africans and they say I speak 7 languages, right? Like they have their language and they speak 6 others. So this idea of, even when we talk about pan-Africanism and Africans coming together, that you have to, stop speaking your language, or you have to, get rid of your culture or forsake your culture for another group's culture. No, that's not what that's about. That's us coming together and developing a culture among a larger culture among all of us as African people, but still retaining our, culture within our homes, because within our home, we have a culture. And when we go outside within the community, we have a culture when we interact with different people. So, this idea that, we can't have, multiple or variety of cultures, it's absurd. And, again, this is the argument that's used by people who try to criticize pan-Africanism, who are very divisive, right? And do not want to see us working together in unity to overturn our situation. But I appreciate and I'll go back to the reading after this. But if you look at some of the names of these institutions, I mean, the Sons of Africa, right? So when you're able to say that, you're able to work with other Africans, because I mean, if it was the Sons of Mende, like you're excluding other groups of people. Like, so how can we work together? What about me? But Africa and African is inclusive. It's an inclusive category. So I'll move on to. So
let me just add. Let me just add a very great point to what you were just saying about the uniqueness of Africa, and the uniqueness of African people, the uniqueness of African culture, that we need to go back in time. So, like you are saying, during that time in Africa, that's why we have various tribes that practice their form of existence, right? And various kingdom and all of those things, right? So when they all met again, they all collaborated and worked together in different forms again, that brought unity, right? And then if they split again and go back to their respective kingdom or to their respective tribe, then they study or they do, what is of that tribe. So, just look at here. And that's how it is in most part of Africa still today. Certain tribes have their God. Certain tribes have their God. And then within our tribe, certain families within our tribe have their God. So you have the family God is still like that today in Africa. Most part, even in Ghana, I grew up part of my life in Ghana. It's still like that in part of Ghana, in part of Benin. So certain tribes have their God. For that family, certain family have their God. And then the tribe have their overall God. So it was just like that. And then when they meet again, they collaborate with different tribes, and they meet, and then they have another God again, and another form of worship that they all worship. And then when they go back again to their perspective kingdom, they worship the god of that kingdom, and then at the same time they had a family god, and these things works. At the end of the day, they believe. So that's the uniqueness of the African culture. That's the uniqueness of the African existence, on how they were able to manage to coordinate communication above them on a lower level and on a higher level, and as they go. So that's the kind of African spirituality that is within African people. That's the kind of humanity that is within African people. And we need to go back to that form of existence or identity.
And that's interesting, man, because if you think about the European, when he came, he's like, if you're not worshiping this God, then it's off with your head. Like there was genocides that were committed because of who you worship, right? People were enslaved, their lands were taken because of who they worship. So I'm glad you raised that, just to show the differences and the way that we behaved and interacted with each other despite those differences. So I'm on page 8, the first paragraph. I'm going to pick back up from there. What is noticeable about such early initiatives is that they identify positively with, oh, am I there? Yeah, that's where I'm at, right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm on page 8, the last paragraph, I believe. I kind of scrolled back. I messed up. I scrolled back, but I'm going to start from the last paragraph. However, perhaps the most important event to undermine both racism and the slave system during this period was the revolution that broke out in the French Caribbean colony of Saint-Domingue in August 1791. That revolutionary struggle eventually led in 1804 to the creation of Haiti, the first modern Black republic anywhere in the world, and only the second independent country in the entire American continent. That's interesting, right? Only the second independent. And look at Haiti today. So the revolution disproved any racist notion of African inferiority, since the African revolutionaries had defeated the armies of Britain, Britain, France, and Spain, the most powerful in Europe. Victory elevated Haiti to iconic status among all those of African descent and produced new heroes and heroines such as Toussaint L'Ouverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Sanité Belair, Cécile Fatima, Henry Christophe, and Alexandre Pétion. I hope there's no Haitians out there making fun of my accent right now. Haiti's constitution established the principle of equal human rights and established the country as a safe haven for all Africans. Indeed, in the early 19th century, several thousand African Americans migrated to Haiti from Philadelphia and other cities in the United States. Haiti also acted as a base for future assaults on the ideology of racism by some of the country's leading intellectuals and statesmen, such as Antonin Firmin and Benoit Savant. And Benoit Savant, he's one of the founders of the first Pan-African Conference of 1900. Because a lot of times when we talk about that conference, there's talks about Du Bois, there's talks about Henry Sylvester Williams, who's always looked at as the founder, but it was actually like Benoit Savant and other Haitians who were already talking about during the conference, and then they connected with Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad, and they were able to bring this into fruition. So this was a collective effort of Haitians, Trinidadians, African Americans, and also those people on the continent, even though it was a small number at the time because of colonization and the scramble of Africa, but they were able to work together to make that conference happen. So wanted to uplift that. Also, another quick note too, just to go back when we were talking about those African institutions, in those names, you notice like it didn't say the African American Episcopal Church, like, what I'm saying? It's an African, African Free Society, not African American Free Society. So, they knew exactly who they were. But yeah, I don't want to move from this. Actually, let me read the next paragraph and then we go into Haiti. So the Haitian Revolution might also be considered an early form of pan-Africanism, of African unity, alongside other acts of liberation carried out by the enslaved during this period, such as the revolt of the Malays in Brazil. One historian has presented such resistance in the Caribbean as a 200 years war or one protracted struggle launched by Africans and their Afro-West Indian progeny against slave owners. The Haitian Revolution united Africans from different parts of the African continent, as well as those born in the Caribbean. They established their own common language of communication, religious practices, and worldviews in pursuit of liberation, and they managed to maintain a struggle and vision of freedom for over a decade. The various maroon communities or settlements of liberated former African slaves that existed throughout the American and African continents in the modern period can be thought of as other early forms of Pan-African unity. Of these, the most celebrated was Palmeiras in Brazil, an African kingdom where thousands of liberated Africans from different backgrounds found refuge for nearly a century until it was destroyed by invasion in 1694. However, Palmeiras was not an isolated example, and South America was the location for many such African settlements, variously called quilombos, cumbes, and palenques, which may also be considered early forms of Pan-Africanism. So yeah, let me stop there. This again, because a lot of us, when we think of Pan-Africanism, we get caught up in the formal idea and concept of and movement of Pan-Africanism, and we don't look at what the title of this chapter is, the forerunners, or those people who are laying the foundation of African unity and organization, no matter where you were from. And very much so in the African diaspora, this was needed to be done because Africans were coming from all parts of the continent. They were coming from West, Central Africa, and even some were coming from East Africa. You know, even though the large amount came from West and Central Africa, you did have people who were coming from places like Madagascar. So with that being said, these Africans in the diaspora understood they had a common interest to be liberated and started working together and forming new institutions, new organizations, new groups that transcended their ethnic divisions. And so that's what's spoken about here. And so, you know, Haiti being the greatest example. But remember when I was talking about in the piece earlier, reparations, when they talked about at the Reparations Summit, you know, Ghana's president, Kofu Addo, talked about how Haiti had to pay $25 billion in 1825. They were forced to pay $25 billion, I think over a period of time, though, due to the property that was lost by the slave masters. So even the slave masters were receiving reparations. But the people of Haiti, where is their recompense? Where is their reparations for the years of enslavement and forced labor? And that's something that, you know, needs to be discussed because Haiti is one of the poorest nations in the world. One of the poorest nations in the world, but France was able to, most of the wealth that France acquired came from the exploitation of the land of Haiti and the workers of Haiti. France was dependent on Haitian labor for their wealth before Haiti won its independence. So, you know, that's the serious contradiction that we have to deal with. But yeah, you know, I appreciate this chapter. We really getting into what Pan-Africanism is. Did you want to say? I know we're running short on time. You wanted to?
Yeah, sure. Let me ask. Let me add a few things, and let me go back to Haiti first. You know, as you are speaking, you know, there was one thing that came to mind. I mean, many things that came to mind, but one important thing that came to mind is that, I mean, all of these things African did in Haiti to bring freedom to light to African people, both at home and abroad. All of these things that these are powerful men, powerful women who were brave to come together to establish a form of peace that inspire African all around the world. So as you are speaking, what came to mind was, how can we pay Haiti back? How? How can we really pay Haiti back for the step she took that manifested with African all around the world? How can we pay them back? And we can pay them back, number one, we can pay Haiti back, number one, the African continent. I'm talking about the African continent. That's how we can pay Haiti back. All colonial influence, because at the end of the day, all of them depend on Africa. All these colonialists, they depend on Africa to survive. We can stop the West when it comes to our resources and stop giving them our resources and stop signing bad deals and treaty with them when it comes to our resources, because that is what still making them powerful. And this is how I believe we can pay Haiti back, by gaining full independence on the African continent, then allowing these colonialists to have full influence on the African continent. It is an insult to Haiti. It is an insult for what Haiti fought for. And up to now, Haiti is the one that is still carrying our cross, that burden for the entire African race, for the entire Black race. Haiti is still carrying our cross. And that's how we can pay Haiti back, by putting force on the colonialists and tell them, this is the time that you pay us back reparation. And this is the time that we're going to hold on to our mineral resources. This is the time that we're going to hold on to our land. And this is the time that you yourself leave Africa and go back to where you're coming from, take your military and leave the African continent. And this is a time that African leaders need to come together to stop the West from undermining African nations, African leaders, and putting in leaders that they want. This is the time. And I believe this is how we can pay Haiti back for fighting for freedom. Now, as you are reading, there was something that Haiti came out with, and I believe this is what African leaders need to come out with in this time of our struggle. Now, before Haiti fought for independence, they recognized few things. And one of the things they recognized was to have one common language of communication. So they recognized that if they do not communicate in one common language, if they do not communicate in one common language and they communicate in the language of the colonizer, it will become difficult for them to defeat the colonizer. And this is one reason Haiti was able to become victorious in their fight against the colonizer. So they were able to have a one common language and they all communicated through it. Another thing they did was they were able to have a common religion. So they were not practicing the religion of the colonizer. Because if they were going to do that, they were not going to go against the colonizer. First of all, how can you be going against the colonizer? Well, the religion you practice, the God of that religion look like the colonizer, do things like the colonizer, think like the colonizer. How are you going to go against the colonizer to fight against the colonizer? They were able to recognize that we cannot practice their religion. So the Haitians were able to form a religion that they could practice, that could fit to their identity. And that's how they also succeeded, because that alone was able to unify them, practicing one language. And another thing they did, they were able to manage and maintain the struggle. You should have a vision of what you're fighting for. And that is what African people need to do. We should learn from Haiti. You should have a vision of what you're advocating for, or what you're struggling for, of where you are going and what you want. You should have a vision. And the Haitian people did it. And one last thing was, they have a view of what? Freedom. They have a view of what? Freedom. And that is what they wanted. And I think Africans need to learn from Haiti. We cannot be talking about decolonization and we are still practicing the religion of the colonizer, and we are still looking at the God we serve look like the colonizer, and we are still saying this God died for us. We are still saying Jesus Christ died for us on the cross of Calvary. But when you look at history, no white man died for us or for African people on the cross of Calvary. So the Haitian people were able to recognize that. The African Haiti were able to recognize that and said, no, we cannot serve the same God as the colonizer.
Hey, that's peace. And this is the month of resistance, Black August, the blackest month of the year. The Haitian Revolution actually commenced in the month of August, August 22nd. So I'm glad we are talking about Haiti because they are a symbol of resistance. And we're still fighting. Haiti is still fighting, and African people are still fighting to be free to this day. So, you know, we have to use we looked at Haiti as motivation, as inspiration during the antebellum period, you know, during the time of slavery. And we should continue to look at them as a symbol of resistance, and many others who fought to liberate African people. With that being said, there's a conference going on this week by the Black is Back Coalition. Wanted to uplift that, so you know you can check out the blackisbackcoalition.org. I think the conference is going on today and tomorrow. So that's, you know, conference put on. Black is Back Coalition. It's a coalition of Black organizations, radical revolutionary organizations that are fighting for liberation here in the United States. Also, there was a recent attack on the African People's Socialist Party. Wanted to uplift that, you know, with some trumped up accusations against the African People's Socialist Party. So just wanted to say that we united with the African People's Socialist Party, and shout out to the December 12th movement and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who came out in support, and other organizations that came out in support of the African People's Socialist Party, as the FBI, which is the United States government, is attempting to undermine another movement for liberation. It's reminiscent of what was taking place in the 60s. So just wanted to put that out there as well, and appreciate everybody for tuning in and staying engaged in the chat. Continue to tune in. We're here next Saturday, same time, 10 a.m. as we continue to read from this book, Pan-Africanism, A History. Again, appreciate you all. And until next time, peace and have a revolutionary day.